This episode is brought to you by On Your Mark, a college success program for neurodivergent students at Marquette University. Call 414-288-0203.
So the difficulty in narrowing down their future to a single career path when you have multiple viable options is a significant source of distress.
Making big life decisions, where to go to college, what type of career to pursue, or even what interests to let go, can be difficult for everyone. For kids who have a wide range of skills and could be successful going in several different directions, that choice becomes even harder. How can we nurture strengths while also realizing it may not be realistic to pursue all of the possibilities? Today, we're talking to Dr. Jon Goodwin of the University of California, Santa Barbara about multipotentiality. That's straight ahead on episode 162. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
One of the best ways to connect with neurodivergent kids and teens is through their areas of passion. And for a lot of kids, that involves their interest in fandoms. From Pokemon to Marvel to Harry Potter, when we speak the language of kids, we're better able to connect and support them. You've heard us talk about our new learning platform, Neurodiversity University, and I'm excited to announce a new free resource that is there for you to access and use with the young neurodivergent people in your life. Using Fandoms and AI to create coping skills is a resource that I developed using the wide-ranging knowledge of the artificial intelligence of ChatGPT to create both resources and a model that you can use to create connections between a kid's individualized interest in fandoms and the coping, communication, or other skills that they need to develop. I know that sounds really complicated, but once you get into it, not only will you understand, but you'll be able to utilize this resource on your own. This resource is totally free, and you can access it by clicking the link in the show notes. Okay, my conversation with Jon Goodwin is up next.
When I found the Neurodiversity Podcast, I was really kind of
desperate to learn about myself and understand myself.
And understand my kids. And honestly, I wanted to find like a
tribe who I could relate to and feel like I fit in.
This podcast brings on guests who seem to be moving neurodiversity more
into the mainstream. And Emily Kircher-Morris is amazing.
I feel like she's talking straight to me sometimes.
Her knowledge about people who think differently is so refreshing. Everyone's different.
And the world needs to
understand them. And that's what the
Neurodiversity Podcast is doing.
Helping them understand
us.
Us.
Today, we are talking to Dr. Jon Goodwin. Jon is a licensed psychologist and a nationally certified school psychologist, and he is also assistant professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So, Jon, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
I'm so pleased to be here.
So we're going to talk about some of the nuances and unique topics that some students face when they are choosing a career. But since this is a domain that maybe some of our audience isn't really all that familiar with, I was hoping that maybe you could just give us a brief overview of what career counseling is and how it can benefit students. Because I think when people think of career counseling, they think of like adults who are maybe trying to change a career or something like that. And so if you can just give us a little foundational information there, that would be great.
Well, career counseling, first and foremost, is an intervention, and it can be useful for individuals across the lifespan, especially for those who may be at a juncture in their lives where making a career decision can be pretty high stakes. And so, as you mentioned before, certainly adults, maybe if they're transitioning to a new career or they're entering the workforce for the first time, they might try to utilize career counseling services. And if they are affiliated with a university or some sort of institution of higher learning, most colleges provide resources to help facilitate that career counseling process. I think what's most relevant to what I want to share is how can we optimize career counseling for our high ability students who are in the K-12 educational arena. And most often, students have access to some sort of career counseling, vocational guidance support when they reach high school, although there's certainly a case to have our students think about it even earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So career counseling is an intervention, and the vocational guidance process really takes into account the unique circumstances of the individual. As we go a little further, I'll talk about values, right? There's consideration of interests, and a confluence of other factors that are pretty relevant to making a career decision choice.
I know when I was a school counselor, I worked at the elementary level, and we did career stuff even at that age, and started having them kind of think about those things as they were even choosing some of their middle school courses. It was very exploratory and just kind of starting that conversation and just having kids think about, like, what are their interests, some of those things.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting too, when I reflect on this, and I talk so much with the clients that I have in my office about college and career choices and making those decisions. In a lot of ways, for our kids who learn differently, who are high ability, who are neurodivergent, whatever, it can be tricky to make that choice. But actually, in a lot of ways, I feel like it's kind of liberating, because we push kids through school and don't adapt their programs of study all that much in order to prepare them for the quote unquote, like, real world. But then when they actually get to that real world, they get to finally choose something that fits their strengths, that fits their interests. Like, you're not going to have a kid who struggles to sit still through the day choose a desk job, or, building on what you were just saying. Do you feel like the schools are doing enough to help kids really prepare for those careers in that K-12 realm?
As a school psychologist and someone who's a big proponent of optimizing school resources, I want to be cautious and being critical.
Of course.
But I do think that we can always do better.
Right.
I really am impressed, as you had shared, that at the elementary school level, there were at least some exploratory conversations about career options. And I think that that is something that could be a real boon for our students, and particularly our high ability students who may also have one or more areas of disability.
Mm-hmm.
We know that this is a population of students who are often perplexing to parents and to school personnel. I'm a school psychologist by training, and so it's a bit unique, a bit of an anomaly that I have an interest in career interventions for high ability students. But, most school psychologists are very adroit with disability, right? But when you have the intersection of giftedness and disability, even many school psychologists would be kind of perplexed about how to meet the array of their needs, right? And so just as we think about educational planning, right, we want to support the areas where there may be challenge or need for support. We also really, really, really want to develop, nurture those areas of strength and talent. And this is very pertinent to the career decision-making process, the career counseling process. And so I think there are so many things that we can do better. I do think that schools, by and large, are doing the best they can.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. Well, and it always comes down to, do you have the staff? Do you have the time? Do you have the money? And I think especially for a lot of those kids who seem like, and this is kind of the mantra, that they'll be okay on their own, they don't always get a lot of those resources.
Yep.
So let's dive into this specific topic that's your area of interest that I really want to talk to you about, which is multipotentiality. So let's just start off. What is multipotentiality?
I think it's helpful to start off with multiple plus potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so multipotentiality is really an amalgam of those two ideas. Multipotentiality is often thought of, and I think a good working definition, or individuals who are multipotential are those individuals who have diverse talents and interests, and they can succeed at a very high level in a number of different fields, okay? oftentimes these fields might be quite divergent.
Right.
The potential aspect typically refers to something maybe latent or even uncertain, but it can be developed and it's indicative of capacity. And a major question for students who are impacted by multipotentiality is, how do I make a career decision? And how can I choose a path from so many realistic possibilities? And so it's really important to think about with our multipotential students, there's an important distinction between some of the career choice dilemmas that most pre-collegiate students may experience, or even students who are in college. I think that it can be difficult for anyone to explore or commit to a particular career path, right? However, for many students who are not multipotential, they typically, certainly by the time they get to prepare for college, they've kind of circumscribed their career choice options to a relatively limited array of options. With our high ability students who are impacted by multipotentiality, they may have multiple highly divergent career paths that they could pursue and be successful at a very high level.
Mm-hmm.
I want to share a definition of multipotentiality that was provided by actor Lubinsky and Benbow in 1996, which is, multipotentiality refers to any individual who, when provided with appropriate environments, can select and develop any number of competencies to a high level. And I would add, to a very high level.
Yeah. And so having all of these different possible pathways, I'm sure that there are people out there who are probably like, why is that a problem? You can go a bunch of different directions. Isn't that wonderful? Just pick one. But it does come with some areas of difficulty. So what are some of those areas of difficulty that might come along with this?
In many ways, I can understand why some folks might say, well, is that a problem? Right? You have options. Well, it can really be difficult to, especially developmentally, ostensibly narrow one's future to a single career path, right? When you have multiple equally viable options. And the dilemma of having to make a choice can actually be a very significant source of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so a concern that can emerge for multipotential students who, say, for example, they might want to pursue a career in physics, but could also be very successful in a career in education.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps they are mathematically precocious and like to pursue a career in engineering, but they may also have excellent skills and interests that would offer them great success in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so that example really describes the difficulty in trying to find which path should I go. A lot of anxiety could stem from the idea that if I go down this one path, right, and I can certainly be very successful going down this path to be a physicist, for example, well, what if I end up regretting that later? Or what if I could be equally or more happy if I go down the career path of being a physician?
Yeah.
So the difficulty in narrowing down their future to a single career path when you have multiple viable options is a significant source of distress. Another thing that's noteworthy is that multipotential students may also suffer from some perfectionism, right? So the idea of seeking the perfect or ideal career can be a source of anxiety. And when I think of perfectionism, anxiety really characterizes that.
Of course.
The other thing is that students make career decisions. They don't do it in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
There are many other stakeholders who may have some influence on their educational path and their subsequent career choice, right? So some students who are multipotential, they may feel coerced by parents, by educators, other stakeholders to make decisions based on status, based on higher earning potential, based on kind of the expectations within that family or that community. I'm not a parent, but I have two. And as a first generation college graduate, my parents will clearly acknowledge, yeah, we live vicariously through you. And I think that that's not something that is uncommon for high ability students, and particularly those who are impacted by multipotentiality. And I think the last big issue affecting students who are impacted by multipotentiality is that many students feel like they have to make commitments that require long-term schooling, long-term investment in resources and energy. And when you invest so much to pursue one career path, it can be at the expense of pursuing another viable option. And not only is there significant investment in like financial resources, but the timing can also delay progress in other life milestones.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially that long-term time investment is difficult to change your mind,
mm-hmm.
right? After several years have been marshaled toward a particular career path.
Mm-hmm.
Even after there are serious doubts about that chosen career path, once you've entered it.
More in a minute.
On Your Mark is a program that's making attending Marquette University easier for neurodivergent students. On Your Mark is a college success program designed to help neurodivergent students navigate Marquette. They work to build an individual support team and structure that neurodivergent students need to thrive in college. Everyone on that team receives training on best practices for working with neurodivergent students, and then the team assigned to the student helps them build academic, social, and independent living skills by offering one-on-one coaching, peer mentors, weekly seminars, tutoring, and mental health services. The focus is on communication and interviewing skills, relationship development, time management, self-care, stress reduction, and more. So, as you help plan your students' education future, remember the On Your Mark program for students enrolled at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Learn more at marquette.edu/on-your-MARQ, or just look for a link in the show notes. I think kids are looking for the quote-unquote right decision.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when I'm talking to my clients, I'll say, there are many right decisions. Like there's no one decision that's necessarily more right than another, but you just have to weigh out what's important. And I liked how you were also describing basically people are very familiar with the idea of a fear of failure, but what we're kind of talking about here is a fear of success.
Exactly.
And the implications of what comes along with that. So, you go to like a TGI Fridays and their menu's like a million pages long and it's so hard to choose. Like, what's the thing that's going to make me happiest? Like, what am I going to enjoy the most? I feel like you leave dissatisfied because what if I had gotten this other thing? And that's kind of an analogy here for what kids are facing.
I love that example because it really is a paradox, right? To have a menu of options might on its face seem like a really good thing, but there can be a lot of distress with having to decide and commit.
Yeah. You're giving something up.
Pretty much.
Okay, so we've got these kids and they're realizing this and they're having to make some of these decisions. So what are some of the strategies that can help them know what direction to pursue? What are some of the considerations that we need to take into account? What questions do they need to be thinking about to help them on this path?
I think first it's important to start off with acknowledging the problem and also validating what the student is experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
As educators, especially those who are interested in gifted education or really talent development,
mm-hmm.
which is something I kind of prefer, is there's this dilemma of well-roundedness or expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to have someone who's a generalist or a specialist, right? And this can be particularly notable for our twice exceptional students who might have outstanding areas of precocity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to acknowledge, Yeah, making a career decision, it can be high stakes, right? And also acknowledging the extent to which there are these other influential factors. One of the good places to start when we're thinking about career interventions, or helping with that vocational planning process, is to actually have a really good start off with a good assessment. So gathering information regarding the student and do it in a collaborative way. Oftentimes with a career assessment, there is gathering information regarding vocational interests of the student, information about career aptitude, and we have some formal ways to obtain that information, but really doing a good review of scholastic records, archival information about strengths, interests, that's a really good place to start. And, within the context of the assessment process can, in and of itself, be an intervention, and that knowledge is power to the extent that we can do something with that knowledge. I think that's probably where I would start this whole process. Validate the concerns, the issues, the distress that the student may be experiencing, and acknowledge that some of that distress is very much internal, right? But other parts can really be exacerbated by outside influences, by family stakeholders, those social expectations.
Yeah, I think, taking all of those pieces and kind of putting the puzzle together and trying to help really look at it and observe it from all of those different angles can be really helpful to get a little bit of clarity and just kind of figure out what those next steps might be.
Earlier I had mentioned that there can be a lot of anxiety about the time commitment, right? If you focus on a particular career path, especially if it's one that is particularly specialized or requires significant time commitment, that can be scary. We know that academic acceleration is a very evidence-based intervention to support our high ability students. And we know that there are several different forms. And any kind of an accelerative intervention, essentially it shortens the time that a student spends within the K-12 education system, right? So we know about whole grade acceleration. We also know about subject acceleration. We know about early entrance and dual enrollment, right? Curriculum compacting and curriculum telescoping. And so I think that a really efficient and effective way to kind of get ahead of some of those anxieties is to, for students for whom it's appropriate, really make sure that our high ability students have access to academic acceleration, because it minimizes that time investment that might be a source of anxiety, because when we truncate the time that a high ability student spends within the K-12 education system, there may not be that same type of worry or concern or anxiety about their post-secondary time commitments. The other thing, and this is really after we've gathered that assessment data, is really help guide students to consider careers that merge multiple divergent interests, right? So for example, I think I may have mentioned a student who has an interest in physics, right? But they're also interested in and could be very successful in a career of education, right? Well, there are prospective careers that can combine those two interests. And so I think that part of that awareness and knowledge building, or even consciousness raising, right, is to ensure that these students are aware that there are actually viable career paths that they can pursue that merge their interests.
Sometimes I'll have a client who has some of these various areas where they could be really successful. It's quite often one that they're really passionate about that's in the area of the arts. Like they're an amazing writer or a musician or a dancer or something like that. And they feel like that's not practical enough. And so then they feel like that's the piece that they have to go up. And sometimes, granted, I'm not an editor or a publisher or whatever, but I will read the things that these high school students are writing and I'm going, you could do this, like this could be the thing, but they're so fearful. They've internalized that message like, oh, well, you can't make money as whatever doing that, and you need to choose something more practical. Do you have anything that you would say to those students or to their parents or counselors about how to help them tease that out?
Yeah. This is common, and it can actually be pretty tough to address. I think it's so unfortunate that there can be those discouraging messages to students who really have a talent and an interest in the arts, the creative arts, right? And I think it underscores how valued that part of the human experience is within our modern society. But that's a different conversation.
Right.
Part of what I think is important is, once again, to go back to the student and really have them to prioritize their values. Prioritization of values can really take someone very far in this career decision-making process. I would also encourage other stakeholders to try to rein in characterizing certain career paths as practical and not practical,
right?
Just because of how discouraging that could be. One thing that I will also say, though, is that if we're talking about practicality, what I think is really important for students multipotential students in particular, to understand is that their careers are just one aspect of their lives.
Right.
They may have interests in areas that maybe they themselves may not deem to be practical, although they have the interest and the talent to pursue that career. How can you meet those needs or address those interests, fulfill that aspect of your interests, your talents, and nurture them in ways that are extra vocational, right? Like outside of your career path. When I tell students about, well, you have this interest in painting, right? But you also have this interest in some other career path. Given your values, given your interests, given what kind of life you anticipate in the future, how could you fulfill or satisfy or develop your talents in art in a way that's not related to your career? Can you do this as something that you do on your time off, right? Is there something that you can do on a volunteer basis that can meet this need, this area of interest? Because things that are not work oftentimes can be our hobbies.
I feel like there are some people who can have a job that is just a job. Clock in, clock out, go home, and that's okay for them. I don't know what that would be like, I think, personally, but that's me. It's like, unless I'm all in. But I think that's something that sometimes kids have to weigh out. It's like, if you think that this is a job that is satisfying enough and you're fine with doing it, and you want to find those things outside of your job or whatever, absolutely. That's one of your options. But if you're somebody who has to be really invested in what your career is, if it's hard for you to engage and stay motivated in something that doesn't fulfill that for you, then it doesn't do a whole lot of good to go into something that's going to feel like you're trudging to work every day.
Yeah. And you may not be successful, right? Like part of that, particularly for our students who may feel coerced to pursue a particular career path that maybe they're interested in, but maybe they don't have the same passion for as they would another path. I always encourage them, one, if you can, pursue a career that you would want to pursue even if you weren't getting paid for, right? Because that's most propitious to career satisfaction. But also, I encourage them to develop some advocacy skills too. Like, for example, part of, and I'm thinking about a student in particular who was interested in pursuing a career to become a teacher, and family was very much against that. And part of, I think understandably, part of what they were concerned about was, if pursuing a career in K-12 education going to prevent them from pursuing this other career path that would allow a student to make a lot more money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I think the great outcome was the student was able to advocate and communicate in a way that was cogent to parents and family, that this was the right path for them. It was the path that they were motivated to pursue, right? And that they were going to pursue it despite some of the contingencies that family was trying to impose. So specifically, they were saying, well, if you want to go to school to become a teacher, I'm not going to finance it. One of the strengths of the student is that it was a very competitive student who was able to get a full scholarship, right?
Yeah.
So, this was a student who recognized that they had leverage, and that it was something that was really the best decision for them. And ultimately, the positive ending is that not only was the student able to advocate for authentically pursuing a career path that aligned with their values, but also eventually getting those other stakeholders to recognize it too, and be on board. And I think that's a gradual process. Once a student pursues a career path and they realize this is what, they're committed to that path, they're motivated, they're passionate about it. The beautiful thing that can emerge is that their loved ones, other stakeholders actually see them thrive, right? And be very successful. And that can be very inspiring. And that's a really positive outcome.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a good note to wrap up the conversation, just with those ideas about advocacy and finding the things that are aligned and hopefully helping kids move along that path. So, Dr. Jon Goodwin of the University of California, Santa Barbara, thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to talk about this and to talk with you.
We're all familiar with the poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. A lot of us interpret this poem as a tribute to individualism and blazing our own trails. But in reality, it's a piece that reflects on the loss of being unable to follow more than one path in our lives. There's a line in the third stanza that talks about how once we're on a certain path, we may hope to circle back to the other path in the future. But once we've traveled far enough, it's unlikely that we'll return. Take a moment and reflect on the poem using this perspective. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads onto way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. When my clients are struggling with life decisions, we reflect on the fact that there are very few wrong decisions in life, just decisions that lead us to a different point in the future, one that we couldn't anticipate or know in advance. It's hard to make decisions when there are lots of paths, which we can only see so far down the path until they are bent in the undergrowth. Dealing with multipotentiality means accepting the uncertainty of life and letting go of the idea that there is a right and a wrong decision for most of those choices. It's hard for perfectionists to come to terms with this reality. But remember, there is no wrong decision in any of it. It's just a different path. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
This episode has been brought to you by On Your Mark, a college success program for neurodivergent students at Marquette University. Look for a link to On Your Mark in the show notes. Thanks again to Jon Goodwin. You can check out his research and his work at UC Santa Barbara on the episode page and in the show notes. Also, thank you to the Council for Exceptional Children, who held their annual conference last week in Louisville. We were able to meet some fantastic people who parent, teach, and counsel neurodivergent people every day. It's always nice to talk to you guys. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Road Not Taken. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.